was a great session, buddy. I love the real-world examples. I love the practical application that it teaches. Thanks so much for contributing your session, man. Really, really liked it. Now, who's ready for a checkup? Because Dr. Flo is taking patients. Next up is Serge Luca, aka #Dr. Flo. He's gonna bring us tips, tricks, and patterns to be successful with Microsoft Flow. He's got tons of real-world experience. He's now a dual MVP, Flow being one of those. He's gonna show us how to be successful and all the things he's learned over the last couple years of being a heavy Flow user. Serge, off to you, buddy.
Hello, welcome to these MVP days. Welcome to my session Flow Patterns and Good Practice from Dr. Flo. My name is Serge Luca. My friend called me Dr. Flo. I am MVP in 2 branches, in Office 365 and also in business application, more specifically in Flow. I'm based in Brussels, in Belgium. My company is ShareQL. So there are key Flow limitations that you need to be aware of before starting a Flow project. Like that the flow duration is maximum 30 days. Same for the approval. After 30 days, your flow or your approval stops running. So that is sometimes really annoying because sometimes some of your flow should be able to run beyond 1 year, or you don't know exactly when your flow will stop running. You can have very long approval process. So the good news is that I've defined a pattern called a controller pattern that I will describe a little bit later that allows you to go beyond that, beyond these 30 days. Also, maximum 250 action in a flow. If you want more, you have to split your flow in nested flow, small flows. I also call them service flow because this flow that can be invoked by other flow are also REST services. So, and that can be very convenient. Loops, there are maximum 5,000 iteration in a do until, maximum 5,000 iteration in a for each. If you want more, you can buy plan 1 that will give you 100,000. Also, there's no custom task form. So today the task form are approval form. So someone can be asked to approve or reject something. You click on the approval, you go to the approval center, there is a tile, and then you get a button approve or a button reject or reassign, and that's it. Sometimes we want to do something different. We want to say it's okay, or I've done this, or I haven't done this yet, or I want to display some business data in the form. So I want to be able to customize the tasks form. So today that's not possible. But I'm pretty sure the Flow team will provide it in the future. But that is important. Also, there's no guest access. That means that a guest user, so user who don't have a Flow license, won't be able to interact with your Flow. And that can be a problem because sometimes you have Flow that can be started from a button, so button flow, or flow that can be run from a SharePoint list, or visually. You can run the flow visually from the flow menu in the SharePoint list. So this won't be possible in Flow with guests. Also, there's no flow provisioning in SharePoint site. That means when you provision a SharePoint site, you might expect some flow to already be running and associated with your SharePoint list or SharePoint document library. So there's no easy way to achieve that in Flow. And the last one, there's no state machine. In the next slide, I will explain what a state machine is. But the good news is the controller pattern that I mentioned before can also be used to implement a state machine. So why do we need a state machine? What is a state machine? Let me take an example. We have a user that publish an important document, a legal document in an intranet. When the document is published, then we have a group of people called advisors who will validate the content. If the content is validated, then a group of users called Secretariat will validate the style. And then we have the big boss that can validate the final document. And of course, these people might not validate it, so they might reject it. So boss can reject, secretariat can reject, advisor can reject. So that means you need to go to previous situation. And that's something which is not easy to implement in Flow. Because the boss can also redirect to any other states, like advisor, for instance, or to secretariat, right? So last year, I did publish a state machine pattern based on a loop and a goto variable. This pattern was very easy to implement. But the thing is, it does not allow your flow to run beyond 30 days. So today I will show you a pattern that fixes both 30 days and the state machine implementation and much, much, much more. So let's take a look at this pattern. I call that the controller pattern. So we start your flow. We create a normal flow. Let's call that the launcher flow here. You see it's in red. And then this launcher flow will start a service flow, a nested flow, that will manage all approval. I call that the approval controller. That's why I call this pattern the controller pattern, the flow controller pattern. And basically, this flow will start nested flow that will manage the approval. So every approval for every level, so let's say level 1 is, for instance, the advisor, level 2 is secretariat, level 3 is the boss, for instance. So each approval level has to be implemented in dedicated flow. So we have level 1 approval flow, and what each approval flow will say is it will analyze the return value of the approval and will send the information back to the controller. And the kind of information the approval flow can return to the controller are, oh, I did timeout, oh, the approval is approved, or the approval is rejected, or I want to escalate the approval to someone else. And then the level 1 approval flow stops running, of course. So this information is sent to the approval controller. The approval controller checks this information and restart another flow if necessary. It could be that, for instance, if level 1 ran into timeout, then approval controller will restart level 1. So the previous approval implemented in the level 1 approval will be deleted because there is timeout. When there is a timeout in approval, it's get deleted. A new one will be created automatically. So this is very, very flexible, very, very powerful. So for instance, let's say in level 1, the user did approve. Then approval controller will start a level 2 approval, which can return the same kind of information, or even more, right? Then if the user in level 2 approve, then approval controller will start another flow, level 3 approval flow, etc., etc. Okay, so here, so each level approval flow cannot go beyond 30 days. If they try to go beyond, then they will go into timeout and a new one will be recreated. So this kind of approval system, or this kind of a flow or composite flow, whatever you call it, can run beyond several years actually, right? So I think that's very powerful. Now let's take a look at one example of implementation of this controller pattern, because there's different way to implement that. But I think the one I will show you will probably help you in your project. So let's switch to the flow environment. And this is typically what an approval flow looks like. So it must start with when HTTP request is received. That means it's a service flow. Of course, you have your approval, and then we have two situations. The first one is, of course, your approval terminate correctly. That means, in this case, you need to talk to the controller, and then you need to say, hey, I'm level 2, so that's the from, I'm level 2, and my response is and the approval output, right? Or you are running in timeout. Indeed, in the approval, you can specify how long you want to approve, or the maximum duration for your approval. So 29 days in this case. So 1 day less than 30 days. And if you are running into timeout or just before running timeout, you will call the controller and you'll say, hey, I'm level 2 and I did timeout. Do what you have to do. So as simple as that. So we want to keep it simple. But of course, the logic is in the controller. So is the controller. It's a service flow. It can receive two parameters, from and result. And basically, we have a big switch. So in the switch, we are going to analyze who is sending a message. So that's the from parameter. And you can get a message from level 1, from level 2, from level 3. Or if you don't get any message, that means you want to start the approval. So in this case, then you're going to call level 1. So you're going to start the flow level 1. And now let's take a look at what's happened in this case flow level 2. So in this case flow level 2, we are going to analyze the result message, right? So there will be another switch. So let's take a look at this one. So we check the result, and the result could be timeout, escalate, approve, reject. So let's take a look at approve. For instance, if it's approved, then this means you're going to say, hey, I'm going to flow level 3. If it's reject, oh, I'm going back to flow level 1. But it can also be escalate, and you will escalate the flow to the big boss, for instance. And of course, escalation can timeout, and then you will get back to the controller. If it's a timeout, for instance, if level 2 say, hey, I'm in timeout, I'm 29 days, then you will start level 2. As simple as that. I mean, there's no complication. It's very, very simple, very, very robust. So basically, we have one flow, or at least one flow, for each branch here. You see? So that's very, very simple, I think. Now let's take a look at how to manage errors. That's something else. And typically what I do for managing errors is this. Let's switch to the flow environment. So this is one of my flow, and all my flow looks the same. That means day code is in a scope called main. And of course you might have other scope in the main scope, subscope if you want. But I manage error at a high level. That means I have a fail scope, I have a timeout scope, I have a succeed scope. And you can specify how you want to get into this scope. For instance, the fail one will run if the main one has failed or is skipped. Timeout will run in the configure run after if the main run into timeout. And of course, succeed will run if there's no error in the main scope, right? So that's very, very important. So you need to manage error because error happen. And typically, for instance, what should you do when your flow fail? Well, there are different ways to react, but some of my customers create a ticket. So for instance, you can use an ITSM tool called ServiceNow. Okay, and you can create a record in ServiceNow, or you can call a supervisor or do what you want. But managing errors is super important. Now let's take a look at the parallelism pattern, which is an important one. Let's take a look at this. So if you want to work with approval, sometime you want to implement reminder. So if this is one of my flow, I have a scope here where I ask someone to approve. Well, you can say after 25 days, I want people to get a reminder. So to do so, you can create a parallel block with a scope, for instance, where you will implement a do until you reach 25 days. So every day you will count the number of days. And then if you reach, for instance, 25, then you will alert the supervisor, right? So here you check if you are reaching 25 days. And of course, you must check that the approval is not done, right? So then you send an alert. So this is also an important pattern. But there's another one, which is parallelism in the loop. This is a very simple flow that copy items from one SharePoint list to another one. Okay, so we grab items from a SharePoint list, and then we have an apply to each, and we recreate the item in another list. But copying 50 items from one list to the other takes something like 40 seconds, right, by default. And the reason is you copy sequentially, one item after each one. There is a settings that not many people know in the apply to each, which is this one, concurrency control. You can say, hey, I want to work in parallel, and I want to go up to 50 threads in parallel. That means your system can copy 50 SharePoint items, in this specific case, in parallel at the same time. So instead of taking 40 seconds, this flow takes 4 or 5 seconds. Of course, use that when it makes sense. In some situation, you need to work sequentially, so it doesn't make sense, right? But this one is very, very important. So now, let's say you did implement concurrency in your loop. What will happen, or what might happen? You get throttle. So throttling means the service you communicated with says that you are working too fast. In the case of Flow, you won't get throttled directly by the backend service, but you will get throttled by the connector. So most connector implement throttling, and you can get the throttling value in the connector definition or the connector documentation. So example, the SharePoint connector throttle after 600 calls per minute, right? And the good news is that we can manage that. Actually, when you get throttle, that means you get the error HTTP 429. I'm too busy, come later, right? So how can we manage that? So we can, for every action, set up the retry policy. There is a retry policy. If you get HTTP error 429, the action will restart by itself. And sometimes it's not the default policy is not enough. So if you go to the action settings, you will see retry policy. By default, it's exponential. That means, for instance, if I remember well, if you try 4 times, the first time it will be after 5 seconds, and then 25, and then 25 by 25, etc. So that's exponential. So you can change these settings. You can say, hey, I want you to try 10 times. Interval should be 20 seconds. Maximum interval should be 1 hour. Minimal interval will be 10 seconds, and so on. Okay, so you can mitigate that. And of course, throttling usually does not happen in test or in development. It happens in production. So you have to carefully test your flow before moving that to production. So be ready to change, to apply the retry policy. If the retry policy is not enough, then you can work at the level of the flow itself. That means you can reduce the concurrency control. So for instance, here you can specify that you want only maximum 25 flow to start, right? So if you have more than 25, the flow that try to start will be in pending state. Of course, less flow means less communication with the backend. Another pattern, the long duration pattern. What is that? Actually, you might have noticed that when Flow called an external system, it timeouts after 120 seconds, so 2 minutes. Okay, so you call an API and then it takes a while, and then your flow runs timeout, which is really annoying. And there's a good news, because you can handle that. Basically, most systems can run in long time because we have the concept of HTTP 202. So this backend system that can take a while to run or to complete your request will return an HTTP status, the 202, which is well known, meaning that the request has been accepted for processing, but the processing has not been completed. I'm working on it, and when it will be done, I will return the value, right? So we can handle that in Flow. That's very easy. We can go up to 30 days, by the way, or even more if we implement the controller pattern. And the idea is that you need to use the HTTP webhook action. So internally, a webhook will be created. You didn't even have to know what a big webhook is because it's automatic. It's completely hidden. So let's take a look at that. This is my flow, very basic. I started manually, and then I call the an external system. And instead of using the HTTP action, I'm calling the HTTP webhook. And it's actually very easy. I'm calling the external system, so I'm passing here the URL, the subscribe method, which is in this case is post, and also I'm passing a pointer to myself. So in Flow, we can use the following expression, which is list callback URL. Basically, this return a pointer to yourself, right? It's for the webhook. So you can pass this as a parameter to the calling system. And let's take a look at the calling system. Of course, you can pass more parameters. And actually, I didn't implement a calling system from scratch. What I did is I did create a long-running flow from scratch. So this is my long-running flow when HTTP request is received. And what I'm going to do here is I'm gonna store the callback URL. Okay, because if you remember here, we did pass this, right, as a callback URL. So here in the calling system, I will grab this callback URL parameter and I will store it in a variable. And then I will do what I have to do. It could be proceeding to an approval or running a bot that will talk to a customer or whatever you want. In this case, I simulate a 1 hour activity. And when I'm done, then I will call the calling system back. So I'm going to use the HTTP action, and in the URI, I will just specify the callback store here. I can even pass parameters back to the caller, right? And this works very well. It works up to 30 days. So it's very cool. Now let's take a look at the trigger agnostic pattern. What is that? So to illustrate that, I will show you an example. This is a SharePoint list where I manage expenses, and when I create a new expense, then a flow will automatically start and the expense will go through an approval process. But user can also run a flow from an existing expense. So they can say, I'm selecting this expense and go to the flow menu and I run the expense approval. Or even better, user can directly invoke the flow from within the list here. That is much more intuitive, right? So you can do that. Or even better, you can run a flow from Excel. So for instance, here, these are my data coming from my SharePoint list. I can say, hey, I want to run a flow on this value. So you just select this in your table. You get this because there is a flow add-in in the Excel rich client and in the Excel web. So you just click on this, run, and the flow will run against this value. So the consequence of this is that you will need several triggers in your flow because you can start your flow from Excel, you can start a flow from SharePoint, you can start a flow maybe from an expense application, you can start a flow from an existing application, an existing expense, right? So for each situation, you might need one trigger because flow can only start from one trigger, right? So you cannot have several triggers that start your flow. So you might need the trigger Excel for a selected row. You can need the trigger SharePoint for a selected row if you run the flow directly from the list. Or if you run the flow when an expense is created from an application, for instance, or from a SharePoint list, then you might need the following trigger, SharePoint when an item is created, etc., etc. So that means that you might have to create several small flows And these small flows will run your main flow. And that's why your main flow might have to start with the when HTTP request is received. This is a very common pattern, right? So I call this small flow, I call them proxy flows, and this one I call that a service flow. Let's quickly move to the conclusion. You will often use flow and Power Apps together. And my advice here is keep your Power Apps forms simple and put the business logic in flow. Also, I've noticed that people use trigger property across the flow. The problem with that is if for any reason you need to change a property, you won't be able to do so. So my advice is store the trigger property in variable or in compose, and then changing the trigger will be easier. Regarding accounts, anytime I create a flow, an enterprise flow, I define a Azure Active Directory group for the owners. And for the connectors, I use service accounts. So I use a dedicated Office 365 account. So I pay a dedicated license for this one, just for the flow service account. Of course, don't do that if you create personal flow. In case of personal flow, you will have to use your flow account, your own private flow account. Regarding management, we can manage flow by using PowerShell or by using the flow management connector, which is very powerful. Environment, use several environment and use the data loss prevention rules, which prevent the usage of some connectors in some environment. That's also very important in terms of governance. IT Pro, well, IT Pro will be very interested with flow because flow can complement PowerShell. Sometimes some long-running action, long-running process are not easy to implement in PowerShell. Flow is much better for that. So IT Pro can use both. IT Pro can also run PowerShell script from Flow. So you can do that by running an Azure Automation Runbook. And this can run in the cloud, so your PowerShell script will be able to run in the cloud or on-prem. For managing Office 365, Flow can be very interesting. Why? Well, because we have a place called the Compliance and Audit Log, where many information surface out. And you can associate a webhook with this event. So you can create a webhooks and a Flow webhook in this place. So that, for instance, you can say, if someone start a Power Apps trial, I want a flow to trigger and I want a flow to alert the management. So there's a lot to do in this place. And much more, because this is just the beginning of Flow. I wish I had more time to describe more pattern and good practice, but if you want, you can take a look at my Ignite session, which is referenced right here. Thank you very much.
up, guys? How'd your checkup go with Dr. Flo? Did you get a good injection? Usually, he's pretty helpful about that. Hopefully it wasn't too painful. Hopefully you don't have to go back too soon. But it's always good to see the doc, right? Okay, next, we have Daniel Laskowitz, MVP out of the Netherlands, another Flow MVP, and his session is managing the creation of Microsoft Teams using Power Apps and Flow. So for those of you guys who are Teams fans, looking for something a little bit more advanced, this one is for you. Daniel, off to you, bro.
Hi everyone, and welcome to my session at Flow Conference. Today, I'm going to talk about how to manage the creation of Microsoft Teams with Microsoft Flow and Power Apps. Before I'm going to show you all the goodies, let me introduce myself first. My name is Daniel Laskowitz and I am 32 years old. I work at Society in the Netherlands. 2 years ago, I became Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the Business Applications category because of my work with Microsoft Flow and Power Apps. In my spare time, I like to go to my favorite soccer team Ajax, since I am a big fan of them. But enough about me, let's talk about the agenda for today. We'll start picturing the scenario. After that, I will talk about the architecture. I'll demo the solution and show you how it's built. I will wrap up this session with future improvements and resources. Let's move on to the scenario I am going to cover. Lots of organizations are currently using Microsoft Teams. A lot of teams get created and everybody is happy. But there are many teams that remain unused or people get frustrated about not being able to find what they are looking for. I have built an approval process where managers of the future team owners will approve or reject the team's request. This makes it possible for people to request a team. The approvers will look for other teams that are there, and if there is a team already for that purpose, they can avoid double teams. There will be a list on SharePoint which will be a master list with all the teams in it. And you will be able to create informal and formal teams. For instance, when you create an informal team, you will be able to use GIFs in your team. And when you create a formal team, you won't be able to use them. Now, let's talk a little bit about the architecture of the solution I'm going to show you. This solution consists of two big things, a Power App and a Flow. The Power App is pretty simple. It's just a form where you can fill in some details. Those form inputs will be saved in the SharePoint list. The Flow is much more interesting. It gets triggered when a new item is added to the SharePoint list. After that, it will set some variables. Then it will trigger an HTTP action, which will get the ID of the owner. This is needed for a step later on in the process. When we have the owner ID, we will trigger another HTTP action, which will get all groups with a certain mail nickname. If the results are bigger than 0, there already is a group with the same mail nickname. So we cancel the flow because we can't add groups with the same name. Next to that, we also update the SharePoint item and set the status to cancelled. When there are no results, there is no existing group with the same name. So it's safe to start creating this group. But not before we start our approval request. For this, we need a manager. So we get the manager from the owner. Then we start an approval action. When the manager responds, we have two options, approve and reject. we create a condition for those. When the approval is approved, we update the SharePoint item and set the status to approved. Then, we add 2 HTTP actions to make sure we create a group, and then we create a team based on this group. When that's succeeded, we update the SharePoint item and set the status to created. If creating the group and/or team failed, we update the SharePoint item and set the status to failed. When the approval is selected, we update the SharePoint item and set the status to rejected. Enough talk about the architecture. Let's show you how it's built. First, I'm going to show you the Power App. As I already said, the Power App is fairly simple. There's a form with a couple of inputs. We have a title where we can fill in the name of the team. Next, we have the alias. This will be used for the email address. The alias will be automatically filled because it's not allowed to use spaces, for instance, unlike the title field. Below that, there's a field called visibility. It has 3 options: public, private, and hidden membership. Public means anyone can join the group and view the contents without needing permission. Private means owner permission is needed to join the group and non-members can't see the contents. Hidden membership is just like private, but a little bit more strict. Non-members can't see the contents and the members of the group. Next, there's a description field, which you can use to add a more meaningful description. The owner field is used to add an owner to the team. In a lot of companies, an assistant or secretary will create teams for board members or higher up managers, so that's why this field can be changed. The status field is set to new and can't be changed, since this is a new request. To submit this form, click the Submit button and the SharePoint list item will be created. To make this a better user experience, I will lead the user to a screen that says thank you. Now let's find out if the Power App saved the user input to the SharePoint list. As you can see, we are now in the SharePoint list. All the columns are present here: title, alias, owner, status, and visibility. When I click the title, you can see all the different values. Let's close this down and switch to Flow to see what happens next. This is where all the magic happens. It's the flow that gets triggered when there is a new item added to the SharePoint list we just saw. When I open the When a New Item is Created trigger, you can see the details of that SharePoint list. Below that trigger, I have added a lot of variables. This is because I need to use these variables later. Tenant ID, App ID, and App Secret I need for the HTTP actions in this flow, just like the graph URL that's a little bit lower in this flow. Group already exists, Group ID and Owner ID are being used at other parts of this flow. There are 2 HTTP requests in the beginning of this flow where I will elaborate on. The HTTP getOwnerID request will get the ID of the owner, since we only have the email of the owner. The HTTP get existing groups request will search for groups with the same name as the team that has been requested. But how does an HTTP action actually work? Let's open up the HTTP get owner ID action and find out. Usually, when you fire an HTTP request to an API, it won't work. That's also the case with the Graph API. You must be authenticated with the Graph API to get a result from your calls. The authentication part of the HTTP action really helps us here. With these fields, you can easily send HTTP requests to the Graph API. But where do you get the tenant ID, app ID, and app secret? You need an Azure AD app for this. Let's switch to the Azure portal to show you how you can create an Azure AD app. This is the Azure portal. We are now in the app registrations menu of Azure Active Directory. If you want to get here, you first have to select Azure Active Directory and then app registrations. You can see there's already an app called Teams Creation. That is actually the app I'm using for this demo. But for now, we are going to create a new application registration. So click that and then you can fill in the name. For now, we'll choose test application. And as a sign-on URL, we can use localhost. Then click Create to create your app. Now we can already see there's an application ID. So if you want to copy that, click the copy button. And that we can create within our flow. If you click settings and you go to keys, then you can create your application secret. So as the key description, fill in secret, and then you can choose the duration, 1 year, 2 years, or never expires. For now, we'll choose 1 year. And if you save, then you will see the app secret. Copy the app secret and use it in the variable. Now we have our app ID and app secret. The only thing we need is our tenant ID. Let's close this down and go to the properties part of Azure Active Directory. The directory ID is the value we need. Copy it and that's your tenant ID. When we go back to app registrations, we don't see our app. Change the drop-down from My Apps to All Apps and search for your own app. Go to Settings, Required Permissions, and then click Add. Select an API, select the Microsoft Graph, click the Select button, and select the permission you want for your app. The application permissions are really handy for Microsoft Flow. How do you know which permission you need to select? Luckily, the Microsoft Graph team has some great documentation. I'm not going through all of these, but here are some great examples. For now, I will select the Read and Write All Groups permission and click the Select button and the Done button. Now, I have added the required permissions to the app, but I haven't granted them yet. To do that, I have to click the Grant Permissions button on the top. Without this, my app won't be able to create a group or a team. This was a short tutorial of how to create an Azure AD app and how to assign permissions to it. Now, let's switch back to the flow. Now that we are back in the flow, let's take a look at the Check if Group Already Exists action. This action is a set variable action. The value of the set variable action is set to an expression. Let's dig a little deeper into expressions. What are expressions? Expressions consist of functions that can make your life easier. You can do if conditions, concatenate strings, do math calculations, and so on and so on. But why did I use it here? I'll switch to Notepad to show you. So, I've copied the expression to Notepad to make it better visible. The first thing I want to show you is the body of the HTTP get existing groups and the value property in that body. This will get the groups back with the same alias as the team's request. Around that, we have the length function to count how many objects are in there. And lastly, on top of that, we have the greater function. This function will check if the length of the body of the HTTP get existing groups is greater than 0. If no group with the same name has been found, we will get a false back. And if there has been found a group with the same name, we will get a true back. After the set variable action with the expression, I created a condition which will check if the variable group already exists is true or not. If the group exists, it will go into the if yes path and it will update the status of the SharePoint item to cancelled and terminate the flow. If the group doesn't exist, we will go into the if no path and get the manager of the person who is in the owner field of the team's request. Now let's zoom in on the approval. The approval consists of a couple of things. The title of the approval, in which I placed please review, and the name of the team that has been requested. Next, we have the assign to field. You can enter multiple assignees in here. I added the mail address of the manager we got from the action before. My favorite field of the approval is the details field. Why? Because you can put a lot in here. You can write markdown here. If you want to know more about this, go to this URL. The last two parts of the approval are item link and item link description. These two parts are particularly handy when you want to send an approver to a link where he or she could find more information. After the start an approval action, I added a condition. The condition is set to when the response is equal to approve. This means that when the manager responds to the approval with approve, the flow will go into the if yes part. But when the manager responds to the approval with reject, the flow will go into the if no part. When that happens, I update the SharePoint list item and set the status to rejected. After that, I will terminate the flow. When the manager approves, a lot more is happening. I switched to my flow and opened up all the actions, so you have a better view of what I created. When the manager approved the approval, the SharePoint list item will get updated and the status will be changed to approved. Next, there is a scope with multiple actions. HTTP create group, which will create a group. It is of the method post and the URI is graph.microsoft.com/v1.0, which I already put into the graph URL variable. groups. The body contains some information about the group we want to create, like the title, the group type, and some other properties. Make sure to take a look at the authentication part, because this is included in all the graph calls we are doing in this flow. Below the create group action, there is a set variable action. When you create a group through the Graph API, you get a response back in which you can find the group ID. That's what we are grabbing in the set variable action. Take a look at the expression you need to use for that. The last action of the scope is the HTTP create team action, which will create a team based on the earlier created group. It's a put method, and the URI is graph_url/groups/groupid/team, where group ID is the variable we set before. We use content type application/JSON as a header, and in the body we define the team. Just like all the other Graph API HTTP actions, the authentication properties are all filled in. Last but not least, when the scope is done, there are still some actions to complete. When the scope ran successfully, the SharePoint list item will get updated and the status will change to created. To run an action only when a previous action has run successfully, you need to configure the run after action. This can be done by clicking on the three dots on the top right corner of an action and by selecting one or more of the options there. When the scope has failed, the SharePoint list item will get updated and the status will change to failed. To set the action to run when the scope has failed, configure the run after to has failed. To demonstrate the flow, I will now demo the Power App and the flow. Now that we are in the Power App, let's think of a good title. We'll set the visibility to private and we'll add a meaningful description. I'm adding myself as an owner. Well, this looks pretty good, so let's click Submit. Let's switch to my email to see the approval request, since I am my own manager. Here you can see the team's approval. And let's approve it and submit it. I really want to find out if the SharePoint list item has a status created. So let's go there and cross our fingers. It looks like the team is created. So now, for the moment of truth, let's switch to teams. The team is created. So this is how you can create teams with Microsoft Flow and Power Apps. Let's switch back to the slides to end this session. Let's talk a little bit about future improvements. For the Power Apps part, it would be a great addition to create an overview of requests, so the requester can keep up. Next to that, it would be really great to create a regular expression to validate input. For example, to make sure no special characters are being used. Another great improvement would be to be able to add multiple owners and multiple members. This needs a little bit of work on both the Power Apps and the Flow side. During this session, I only demoed a scenario where my own manager would approve the team's request, but it would be much better to have 2 approvers per department instead of all managers. For this, you could create a SharePoint list. Another improvement could be to add email updates for the requester. This could be a quick win because it's not a lot of work. I will end this session with some resources that will help you to get better at Flow and Power Apps. On the top of the list, there's a link to the Power Apps documentation, which will get you started really well. Below that, there's a link to a great bunch of Flow resources by John Levesque. You should really check them out. I've added some links to graph documentation pages, so you can find out even more about those HTTP calls. And if you want, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out my blog or follow me on Twitter. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thanks for watching.
Alright, so Laskowitz gives us the down low on Teams creation using Power Apps and Flow. Wait, did that rhyme? I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Okay, I know, corny jokes, alright, fine, they're done. On to the next introduction. Shane Young. Needs no introduction. You guys know him. He's the Power Apps guru. The man in the know. Teaching all the flow. Alright, I said I would end it. That's the last one, I promise, okay? Shane Young is about to drop some knowledge on you to teach you how to control your Tesla, if you have one, with your Power Apps and Flow. Do you know that's even possible? Control your Tesla? That's ridiculous, Shane. Don't they make their own app? When I asked him about that, he said, yeah, they do. But why wouldn't I make my own? So, if you want to make your own Tesla app, it is time now for you to see how to control your Tesla and APIs with Power Apps and Flow.
Hello, Flow friends. In today's show, we're going to talk about using Flow to interact with an API. But wait, don't worry. I'm not a developer. You're probably not a developer, and you're thinking, whoa, APIs sound really developer-y. Well, don't worry. We're going to show you how to do it and how we're going to do it as non-developers, how I figured it out. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this app I made to manage my Tesla, right? Because who doesn't want to use Microsoft Flow and some Power Apps in order to unlock and drive their car? So while you watch this intro, we're going to go outside and demo the app, and then we're going to come back in here and I'm going to help you go from a blank flow to a flow that runs an API. But first, here's our intro. Okay, so since seeing is believing, I thought we'd come out here and start out by just walking you through the app does what we say it's going to do. So then we'll go back inside where it's much warmer and build this out. So here I'm going to open up my app. And so here is my Tesla username and password. So this is the Tesla services username and password. So we're going to log in. And so after a few seconds of loading and the neighbor's dog barking, you can see that it's logged into the app. So now what we're going to do is we're going to press the button for unlock car. And what should happen is the door handles and the mirrors pop out. Perfect. So then now let's go over here. And so I'm going to press start the car. And so then now it's returned. So I should be able to hop in here and say, see you guys later. Brr, nothing like a brisk 40-degree days to go outside and do some filming. Hi, my name is Shane Young with Power Apps 911. Those guys. On today's show, we're going to talk about using Flow with APIs. But don't fret, right? If you're not a developer, not a big deal, because what we're going to do is we're going to break it down and I'm going to show you how I figured it out. I've never written a line of C# code in my entire life, and I was able to use these APIs. And you also might be thinking, well, APIs, they sound interesting, but really, you don't have a Tesla, so you're not going to control your car. What are you going to use them for? Well, the first place that I find most people want to use APIs for is interacting with SharePoint, right? So SharePoint, there's a whole bunch of flow actions to work with SharePoint, but it doesn't do everything. For example, one of my customers says, hey, I want to use Flow to manage permissions on my SharePoint list. I said, no problem. There's an API for that. And because I used this app, that's a lot of fun, that was really interesting to me personally to learn APIs, to get over that fear of this developer-y thing. Because let's face it, nobody wants to be a developer. Yeah, that's right. I'm looking at you, developer. You can yell at me, leave me bad comments. It's okay. But none of us want to be developers. We want to be citizen developers. We want to do low-code solutions where we just connect some dots. I'm going to show you how we can do that and we can learn that so that when next time it comes up and you're like, oh, I want to interact with the SharePoint API or some third-party web service or some custom web service that your developers have made for you, you won't be scared of it because we're going to walk you through how to kind of figure that out and get that connected in. Cool? Cool. All right, so let's switch over here to my desktop. And so on my desktop, for 1 second, I just want to show you kind of the app that we just demoed so you can kind of see it without it being, outside and the dog barking and all that fun stuff. But so this screen is just a simple username and password screen I made in Flow, or not in Flow, I made in Power Apps. When you press connect here, it's just going to run a couple of flows. It's going to run a flow to validate that's the right username and password, and then get a token back, which says, hey, this Shane is authenticated, and then we're going to use that token to get all the other data, and so in our case, go and get the car's data. And that took us over to this details screen, which I hadn't even logged in, so I guess it probably won't work, so let's do this. And so then you can see, here is the screen that we use to unlock the car, start the car, we can turn on the AC. It also has all these fun details about the car, so lots of information. So we're not going to get into the Power Apps portion though, that's not what we're here for. So what I want to do is go over to Flow, and I want to build a flow. We're going to go from a blank screen and build the actual flow that we're going to use to control my car. what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and say, all right, I want to do my flows. And so then what we're going to do is do a new, and I'm going to create from blank. I always create from blank because I like to start from nothing so I can show you. If we start from template, then I have to explain what the template brought in, blah, 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 create from blank. Okay, and so when you're learning a new concept, whether it be APIs or just a new action around using OneNote or SharePoint or anything you want to do, what you want to do is try and make the testing cycle as easy as you can, right? So we don't want to try and boil the ocean and do everything at once here. Instead, what we're going to do is I like to use the flow button for mobile. Not because I'm actually going to ever trigger this for my phone. I never trigger these for my phone. But what this does, this allows us to trigger the flow without doing something. All too often I see people make their first step be like, well, if a thing gets entered in the SharePoint list that meet these 17 criteria, then run. And so then to test, they have to go over to SharePoint and enter those 17 things, and it takes a lot longer for them to work through the cycle. Here, to trigger my actions, which is what we really want to do, I'm just going to press a button. So makes it a little easier. So manually trigger a flow. So then we're going to do a new step. And so now we're going to get into uncharted territory. So that's all right. Put your brave face on. And what we're going to do is we're going to type in HTTP. And we're going to ignore all this other stuff. This send HTTP request to SharePoint, once you figure out APIs, is pretty handy. And we're just going to do a basic HTTP action. So click on this guy. And so now it's going to start to walk us through and start to ask us some questions that we haven't answered before, but we're going to figure out what they are. So let's hit the drop down for method. So when you interact with a method, as far as I'm concerned, there's really just 2 different methods that you're ever going to worry about, right? There's other ones here where you can clearly see there's 5. But we're going to worry about 2 because that's what we as the citizen developers really care about. The first one is a get. And a get does exactly what you want, right? Get me a cookie, right? Get me some Christmas presents. Get me something. So get me data from the Tesla. So in our example, in a minute, what we're going to do is we're going to go get all the data about my car, right? So what is the car's name? What is the mileage on it? All of that fun information is just a get command. Pull that down. But before we can do a get request, we're going to do the other request that we often do as citizen developers, and that's a post. And a post just means I want to post something to the bulletin board, like in college. No. Post means I want to push content out to the web service. I want to write something to the web service. So we're going to post out there, and that's how we're going to post that username and password that I typed in so that we can get the stuff. So this is the first piece, the method. Now it's like URI. I'm like, oh, what? So what I did, I went out here, I opened up Bing because I actually use Bing on a daily basis, believe it or not. And I said Tesla API. And so I read a bunch of stuff and I found out that this stuff done by a guy named Tim is the best documentation for the API. Now, typically you would go and start with the vendor. So for the SharePoint APIs, you'd go start with the SharePoint APIs. But in this case, Tesla does not document the API, but a bunch of super nerds have reverse engineered it so we can leverage it. So then here you can see his site is moved. So whatever, take me to his new site. Okay, so then I'm over here, I'm like, all right, Tim, you got me. You're doing a JSON API, which just sounds like something I want. And it says, hey, before you begin, you need to know that this is that URL, right? Oh, well, that's good to know because we know that that's part of what we need. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go over here and say, create me a flow, right? And we're going to go back and we're going to paste this in because we know that's the part. All of these API request things we want to do, this is the URL. SharePoint scenarios, it's going to be your SharePoint site collection is the root, this base URL. So that's what we're going to work from is that URL. So then I'm going to go back over to his stuff. And so then he says, all requests require a user agent header with any value provided. For Tesla's sake, it's recommended you identify your application in some way using this header. Not important to us. Okay, so now we know the base. So then what we want to do is we need to start with authentication, right? Because this particular API is an authenticated API, right? Which is good news because if you can drive my car with it, I'd really prefer you put in a username and password before you do it. And so what you can see is that in order to authenticate, when we authenticate, we're going to get a token back. And this token is what we're going to use with all of our other GET requests, right? So that's what all this documentation says. So when you're going through, you want to go look at the documentation and see what are the pieces of the puzzle you need. And so in order to get this token, we have to do a post. Yeah, right? Remember our choices over here? We chose post. So there you go. So we know it's post. We know we're in the right track here. And we're going to post to OAuth tokens. I'm going to copy this. And so just like this, we're going to paste it in. So that is the URL that we need to post to. That's the URL that we want to hit in order to get do our action. So we're going to post that URL. All right. And then now over here, it says, okay, you have all of these required parameters. Oh my goodness. This is like where your eyes start to gloss over. You're like, what do I do now? We don't fret. This is not a big deal. So what we're going to do is all right, the first one is grant type. So we're going to go over here. And so for in your flow, in the body, it says, all right, what is the content that you want? Well, what I'm going to do is your content is always going to be in these curly brackets, right? So that's JSON or JSON, right? JSON spelled without an A. I don't know. It's a weird word. But JSON is not really anything special, right? They like to call it that to make it feel special and to make people like Jason feel very sad. But really all it is structured text. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, all right, I have to send it a grant type. So I'm going to put it in quotes just like that. And then we're going to put in a colon, just like that. So grant type in quotes and then colon. And then we're going to go back over to the authentication or the authentication documentation. And it says that you're going to put password description, always password. So they're telling me exactly what I want to put. So we're going to copy that over. We're going to put it in quotes again because we know that that's the way that Flow wants it wrapped. So that's the grant type. Now we want to do another one. So all we have to do is put in a comma, and then I'm going to hit enter because I like to do these on separate lines, make it easier to read. We're going to go back over here and we're going to grab the client ID. All right, I'm just working through this list. So grab that. We're going to quotes, boom, semicolon. And so then what goes in there? Okay, so this says it's a string, it's required. An example is ABC, but description is the OAuth client ID. I'm like, huh? What's a client ID? So I start reading the documentation again. And it says, hey, the current client ID, that's the thing we're looking for, is available here. So let's open that in a new tab. Oh, look, there's the client ID. So all I'm going to do is copy this data that they provided, right? I don't understand it. I don't know where this came from. It just says I need a client ID. So I don't overthink any of this, right? So we're going to go in here. We're going to paste this in. And so just like that, I've put in a client ID. I'm going to do a comma here. Hit enter. And so what's next in our list? It is a client secret. Whoop, just like this. So comma, or sorry, so put it in quotes like that, colon. And client secret, well, I was paying attention. It's stored over here. So apparently the client secret and client ID for Tesla changes, oh, Control Z, periodically. So that's why they publish it out here in plain text. But once again, I don't care if my app stops working. I just go copy the new version of it. So we'll do this. And so boom, and right, and this is, you're probably not going to have a client ID and a client secret in yours, right? The SharePoint API, you don't even have to authenticate against it. It uses Flow does the authentication for you, but we're just working through the process, not as developers, just as people who follow instructions. So shift enter. So then now let's go over here. So then now we've done client ID, boom, boom, boom. So now it wants email, all right? And we can see that's going to be my username and password. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this in like that. And then we will leave a spot for that. So we're going to put my email address right there. Yeah, we can put that in there. I don't care. Cincy Shane. My email address is not a secret, but my password is. So then we're going to do password. Oh, sorry. We're not going to do password that way. We're going to go over here. We're going to copy password. And then we're going to do quotes like that. We're going to do a colon. And then I'm going to put my password in here in plain text. So hold on 1 second while I get it. So pause. Okay, unpause, and I'll blur that out because I don't need you guys logging into my car. One of the things I want to caution you, right? Remember, we're trying to do this in baby steps. We're learning right now. So later on, you're going to see that I would go, or probably not later on in this video, but later on in your career, you'd say, all right, I want to get that from Power Apps, right? Or I want to pass that in via a variable, or I want to make that an input. We can do that later. But what we want to do today is we want to make this as easy as possible. So I just put it all in here in nice, easy, plain text because I'm not trying to hide my password for myself. I'm blurring it out for you guys, but it's cutting down the number of things I need to troubleshoot. So I've just got everything here in plain text. And so, right, we had our ending curly brackets that we'd already put in. We do not have a comma here after the end here, but I think that covers this first action. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit save. And now that it's saved, we're going to hit test. And we'll say, I'll perform this action manually. So we'll say test. But this is where the button flow comes in handy. There's really nothing for us to do. We just say run the flow. It's going to run. We're going to say done. Your flow ran successfully. So we're going to click on the HTTP action. And then if we go down here and scroll to the bottom, right, I blur out my password again. What we can see is that we got an access token back and a token type. When does it expire? When was it refreshed? When was it created? So we got data, right? Because once again, baby steps. I wanted to prove to myself that I got this step working before I tried to make a more complex one. We did. Yay us. High five. Boop. So let's go over here. Let's say edit. And now what we need to do, so now we've got a token. We got that token, right? Remember it talked about over here. So when we did the introduction, it said you need that token all the time. Somewhere in here it does. I don't know. Somewhere in this documentation, it reminded me I needed a token all the time. But so now after authentication is done, and we have a valid credential, right, a valid key, the first thing we need to do is get the card, right? So find the vehicle ID. So I'm just going to follow the documentation. And it says, hey, here's an explanation of vehicle ID versus ID. We don't need that. More important, it says, look, we're going to do a get. All right, I like gets. So we're going to copy this. We're going to go back over here. So we're going to say new step. We're going to do another HTTP step, just like that. Just like that. Right, developers say this is hard. This is so easy. We're going to paste this in. Oh, nope, we're not going to paste it in there. That'd be silly. We're going to do a get because that's what the documentation said. We're going to paste in, so we know API 1 vehicles is what we want. But then if we go back up here, we're going to grab the whole Tesla portion of the URL again also. So then if we go back, we'll say home. Oh, we got an extra parenthesis. So there, so we've now got our URL. So go and do a get against this URL. And then let's go over here. And it looks like there are no request parameters. Very cool, very cool. But we need to authenticate somehow. How do I do that? Well, let's go back to the authentication page. Oh, so when we do all of our future requests, we need to send it over an authorization bearer access token. So I'm going to copy authorization. We're going to say edit your flow. Headers. Well, I need an authorization header, of course. We're going to put that in our quotes, I do believe. And then we're going to enter our value. And so our value is going to be what? It's going to be bearer. So let's copy that, bearer. And then we need to insert the token we got back from this step. Now we can't just reinsert that body, right? Because there was a bunch of things. There was a date and a timestamp and a bunch of things in there. So what we need to do now is we need to build ourselves an expression to get that piece back. So I'm going to say expression. And we're going to use a little trick that my buddy Vivek taught me. I'm going to click an X. And then I'm going to go back over here. And now I'm going to be able to do the dynamic content. And so in this case, I want to do the body that came back. We're going to get rid of the X. But the beauty of this now is that we've done the first part of our expression. And so what we need to do now is we need to figure out, how do I get the data back that we wanted? Well, I think what we're going to do is say that Shane doesn't remember. No big deal. So we're going to say, okay, here for a second. We're going to go back to our test. We're just going to run another test. And this is another reason I do baby steps. So we'll let this run. The second part's going to flow, not a big, or it's going to fail, not flow. That's no big deal because we haven't finished that part. But if we go back to this step, we can see that, all right, the thing that we needed was the access token. So I'm going to grab access token just like that. We're going to go back over. We're going to say edit. So this body is not only that, but it is also the access token, right? So we want to go, so get the body response back that we just showed, and then get the access token that came back. So we'll say update authorization. I don't think we need these quotes around this actually. Let's take those off. So authorization, bearer, and then our token seems reasonable. It seems worth the test to me. So we're going to say test, user test, and save and test. After a few seconds, success. And if we click on HTTP 2, what we're going to see, right, because we need to know this, but look, it came back with a, in the body, there's a response. This would be important. And in the response is our vehicle ID. Woo woo. Because that is the piece of the puzzle that we're going to need for the next step. So what we're going to have to do, is, right, so we're going to say body, response. Which response was it? So it was the first response, so response 0. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we're going to want the vehicle ID because that's really what we need out of here. So, all right, we're doing good. Baby steps. So last step is I want to get the car's data. So we're going to say new step. We're going to do an HTTP. All right, HTTP. And we're going to grab the whole API out of the URL again. We'll paste that down here so we have that ready to go. But now I don't know what I need to do. No big deal. Over here. So let's go to state. Data. A cache rollup of all the data request endpoints plus vehicle configuration. That sounds like exactly what I want. So we need to grab this API, or this endpoint. We're going to do a get. That's good. So over here, set this to a get. Paste in the URL. So we've got the URL. Now notice there it is, the API 1/vehicles and then ID in curly brackets, right? So what they're trying to tell us is you need to give your vehicle's ID, right? There's just not a generic ID. We need to give our vehicle's ID. That's okay. That's what we just got up here. So let's go be brave. Let's delete out their code. And we're going to say, all right, I want to do an expression again. We're going to do the little X trick, because when we do the X trick, then we can click on the body of HTTP2. Now, what I would probably do before I did this, though, let's just make a little here, right? So we're going to say, instead of HTTP, we're going to rename this thing. Oh, we're going to try again. We're going to rename this thing. So rename. And so then here, what we're going to do is we're going to rename it to Get Vehicle ID. I like it, right? So making it a little easier to reference. So now back in here, make sure we're between the two pieces like we were. We're going to say expression. We're going to do the X. We're going to click on dynamic content. So get vehicle IDs, body. All right. And what we want is we want the first request. Well, when in these requests, though, they use the old school, right? The really weird math when you learn in school for the first time, right? That 0 is actually the first number. So we want request 0. And then what request do we want? We want requests first. So we're going to do like this and this. And so we're going to say request. So we want request, and then we want the 0 request. And then what do we want? We want 0 request, and then we want the vehicle ID. So vehicle underscore ID. So I think that's right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to copy all this. So Control A, Control C. We're going to say, okay, so that will write it. Oh, it says, nope, Shane, you got that wrong. So what did I do wrong? Let's go look and see again. So get vehicle ID, request. I bet I was not supposed to make those, but those are supposed to be square brackets, not round brackets. Too many bracket types. Okay, so put that in here. Right, remember we just copied that. Let's click on it again and copy it since we got the wrong thing. Control A, Control C. So another trick you might want to do is if you click right here and do add a comment. Paste in your code. Oh, I can see the X body is going to mess us up, so we know that's wrong. Let's just get rid of that. See, this is why we pasted in, so let's go back over here. Let's get rid of that X. So say update. But so this comment ability gives me an easy way to read the code without all the scrolling, right? So, if you're not using a third-party tool like Flow Studio, which my man John makes, which you probably should check out if you're into flows, what you need to do is you need to use shortcuts like this to make it easier for you to see what you've got there. Okay, so that's the method. We're going to do a get. We're going to hit this URL, which is going to have my vehicle ID, hopefully hard-coded in there. Then don't forget about our headers, right? Last time when I was testing, I forgot about them. So we're going to type in authorization. And then we need to do the whole bearer thing again. We're going to make the capital B, right? Because we need to authenticate every request. And so what we want to do is we're going to go up here, we're going to click on this, and we're just going to copy that out so I don't have to type all that in again or figure it out again. Expressions, paste that in, and say OK. All right. I'm kind of nervous. Let's hit save. Let's hit test. We'll say perform the previous run, right? It doesn't matter because all the run does is trigger, so I just don't want to press the button again. So I just say run the last test. We're going to do our fingers like this. Womp, womp. Our flow failed. I wonder what I got wrong. Let's see. So unable to process the action HTTP3 inputs at line 1, blah, blah, blah. Body get vehicle ID, request 0 is incorrect. Because the thing doesn't exist. You know why? Because request is not the word. But what we can do, just to confirm, so go back up here, it's response, Shane. So copy that, vehicle underscore ID, right? But this is we're using the body, the response, the vehicle ID. I bet when you were watching me doing the video, you're like, Shane, you're messing up. Well, I appreciate you trying to tell me, but your osmosis wasn't fast enough. So we'll go back over here. We will edit this and we will change request to be response. We will update that. We will update my comment so that way if I'm trying to glance at this quickly and see what I did or didn't do. So we'll say save. We'll do another test. We will do another one of these, another one of these. Drum roll. Womp womp. Failed again. Page you're looking for doesn't exist. Interesting. All right, let's try this. Let's edit. Let's go back over here. So we've got vehicle ID. Let's go check our documentation. You know what? And it says, oh, you know what? I think that it wanted us to use ID, not vehicle ID. So let's try that. We'll go over here and we will type in ID and say update. We won't fix the comment. You know you're supposed to do that. You don't want to watch me do that again though. So we'll say save and test. Third time's a charm, hopefully. No, third time a charm is not. Oh, but I see what I did wrong. You guys, look, you let me put a typo. API /1 vehicles. All right, fourth time, it's gotta be it. So save and test. Success! Let's click on HTTP3, go down here. And so then now we have a bunch of information about my car, like battery level is currently 78%. You needed to know that. Now you're probably thinking it's really weird, right? That I did this demo, right? It's pre-recorded, so why would I leave all the messing up in there? Because this is what happens, right? If you're watching this and you're trying to learn how to work with APIs, you're gonna have, I know I got it in 4 tries, you might have 40 messes up the first time. It's okay, right? Work through the baby steps. I wanted you to see the pain and the anguish, see the awkward look on my face where I'm like, why is this going wrong? Because that's really what's going to happen to you the first time you work with an API. But the good news is every time you do it, right? So maybe this first app takes you 1,000,000 hours to do. That's okay. The next app might only take you 100,000 hours and then 1,000. And then one day before you know it, you are cranking through these APIs just like that. So I really did. I wanted you guys to kind of see me mess up. I didn't mess up on purpose, but I decided not to edit out all the messing up because this is really what happens when you get in and start working with APIs. Okay? But now we've done it. We have successfully got all of this data. And so then the last little step I just want to throw at you is if we want to throw this back to Power Apps. So if you've done anything with Flow and Power Apps before, you're probably used to going in here and saying new step and then Power Apps like this. And then saying respond to Power Apps, okay? That works great when you want to return just little pieces of data. But when you want to return this whole structure, right? The 800 lines of code or JSON that it knows about my car, what you're going to do is you're going to say, I want to do a response. And so there is this response request over here. And so this is what you're going to send back. And so this response, then what you do is you take the output of this one. So let's save real quick. So you go to here right, we're going to just run another test real quick, grab it, because I need the data. So 1 sec. All right. And so it skipped the response because it has nothing to respond to. No big deal. Go into here. So now that we have this output, right, this body is what I want. I'm going to put the cursor in here. I'm going to say Control A, Control C. We're going to edit our flow. And so then you go to here to the body section, and you're going to say, all right, you're not going to paste that in. But what I want to do is I want to say use sample payload to generate schema. So then that way Flow will be so kind as to figure out for us what our schema needs to be. So I'm going to paste in the data, right? The test results we just got, right? My usable battery levels at 77. Say done. I think my wife's driving the car right now, so the battery's going down as we speak. Okay, so that paste in, see how it did? It transformed it and said, look, for the ID, that's going to be an integer. For the user ID, it's going to be an integer. You know, the VIN is going to be a string. So it went and figured out all of these things for me. And so if you start getting errors in your response around what, you know, what can be null or not type of null, this little response stuff is what you do. But you start out by letting Flow generate it for you by taking the test results, right, the results you want to do, package them up and say, use sample payload to generate schema. So that's another one of those pro trips. All right, so I think that about sums it up here. Let me look for a second. Okay, so I just checked the clock. We're good. I can't go a second over 30 minutes, so I got to go back and trim out 3 or 4 minutes of content. I'll figure it out. Don't worry about me. But what I wanted to do, though, is just remind you guys that if you need any help, check us out at Power Apps 911, where we do Power Apps, Flow, SharePoint, all the fun things you want to do. And then also check out my YouTube channel, Shane Young Cloud. So youtube.com/Shane Young Cloud. I've got Power Apps, Flow, PowerShell, SharePoint, hundreds of videos out there where you can learn, and it's free stuff, and it's even better than the stuff you pay for. So, all right, thanks, and have a great day.
Hey, what's up, guys? Just reading this book from, actually, the author is Paul Colmsey, who's our next speaker. Paul is an MVP out of Australia, and he is constantly building cool solutions with Power Apps and Flow. Not only that, him and John Liu and his daughter Ashley, they travel all over the place doing hackathons. We actually have one that we're planning coming up in the United States around the MVP Summit time in March. So if you want to get involved in an in-person event in the Redmond area, go ahead and hit me up after this event. We can get you more information about that. But on to the introduction for the session. Last, but certainly not least, Paul is stepping it up here to bring home our final session about real-world solutions using Flow. Today you've seen introductions to many of the technologies. You have seen a few intermediate and advanced sessions on how to build cool things using these technologies. And you've seen a couple examples of real-world scenarios. And now we're bringing you the final real-world session of the day to see how Paul put together this solution that helps people be more safe in the field using Power Apps and Flow. Thank you all for joining us. Paul, last one's yours, buddy. Off to you.
Hey folks, welcome to this session in the Flow flavored MVP Days virtual conference. My name is Paul Colmsey and I'm here to talk about a real-world case study that I think demonstrates that Flow really is a pretty serious enabling product now. And so the intent here is to hopefully demonstrate to you, if you have any lingering doubts and you think, oh, I'm not sure if Flow is ready for the prime time, I think this case study will show you a good example of leveraging its strengths and using it to enhance the value proposition of SharePoint, Power Apps, and Microsoft Teams at the same time. So, who am I? I am a management consultant and I do technology as well. And this case study was actually started out me doing management consulting work, but I ended up doing technology work. And this is the one that really, I guess, proved to me the power tools of Power Apps, Flow, Power BI are really amazing at being able to deliver incredibly high value at low cost. I'm also an author. I've written a couple of books. The books are not to do with technology directly. They're actually more to do with my adventures in management consulting, facilitation, and complex problem solving, which is the third point, wicked problem specialist. So if you've not heard of the term wicked problem, go look it up on Wikipedia. That's basically what I do. And I also do a lot of training and mentoring for, I guess, citizen developers, people who work in the business who want to leverage the power tools to develop solutions without going through the traditional IT development lifecycle. I am a business applications MVP, and so I guess let's get into the case study. Here's the background. This is a picture of a railway crossing in Japan. It's called a level crossing because it's all at the same level. And you've got a train going past and you can see there are cars and bikes and pedestrians all walking around. Now the problem with this is, notwithstanding the noise, the fact that it's quite dangerous, there's a lot of congestion and the whole area suffers from this, it's not a particularly nice area. Now, what this project is doing, this is an Australian project that aims to actually improve situations like this, and it is upgrading or removing 50 dangerous and congested level crossings, and in the process upgrading or constructing more than 20 new train stations. Now, there's a lot of money involved in this. This is a multi-billion dollar project happening over about 5 years. This is an example, I guess, of what the result is. You can see here that the road is now separate from the rail network, which means you eliminate the congestion problem. But also through really good urban design, you can make the area look nice, feel good, and just activate the whole area, bring the area to life. And so that is the intent of this project. Now, you might be wondering, this is a construction project, why am I involved in this? Well, the reason is the leadership of this particular project or this program of work, the organization, had a very big focus on what they call learning organization. And I was originally engaged to develop a knowledge management strategy for safety. Once that strategy was done and the framework was built, we then switched modes to delivering solutions. And so that brings us to where we are today. Here is, I guess, some context on the challenges of doing this in a project like this, capturing knowledge, capturing lessons, and distributing that wisdom to the rest of the organization. Here's the first challenge. What I just showed you in the previous picture of those railway stations, there's 50 of them, and they are distributed across quite a wide geographic area. And not only are there a lot, there are actually so many that no one organization can do the work. So they had to engage multiple organizations to get this done. So that means you've got different employees, different standards, different practices, different internal methodologies, a lot of variation in the organizations. You can imagine that lessons from one project could be really valuable to the others, but very hard to capture and disseminate that info. The second challenge is more of a general one. The simple fact is traditional approaches to knowledge management, and in particular lessons learned, really suck. I don't know if you've been involved in a lessons learned exercise. A lot of people have, and it typically involves filling out some spreadsheet or some document and putting a whole bunch of what you think the lessons are. I don't know about you, but I would consider that lesson captured, but that does not mean lesson learned. So not only does it lose a lot of rich context, it actually takes ages to do, if it's done at all, but then it goes off into a filing system, never to be seen again. And it's very rare that organizations actually go back and revisit this stuff, right? And the other challenge is just got to remember, who are our users here? You are dealing with people who are on construction sites. They're very time poor. They rarely get access to a PC, or at least the majority of staff, and they typically will use devices like the guy in the picture here. So they're your three big challenges. In relation to what our strategy was, there were basically 4 pillars to knowledge management in this organization. One was communities of practice, one was finding expertise, one was the documents, the process, the procedures, and all of the content, and one was capturing the insights and lessons. So they were kind of the 4 pillars that we were trying to bring together with the solution. So now I'm going to take you through a bit of a scenario, and then we're going to actually do a demo of this thing. So I want you to imagine this story. A frontline worker sees something that has safety implications, or sees some really good behavior, or even has a bit of a thought bubble or a flash of inspiration. So they can take out their phone and basically, using a Power App, they can share an observation or a good practice. They can put some details about that. And the intent here is rapid capture. We're not asking people to fill in an elaborate spreadsheet. This is all about quickly grab it, capture some photos, capture some media, and basically get that observation down while it's fresh in their mind. That then is shared to a program-wide feed. And so this means that every other person on any of those 50 different sites that I mentioned earlier can actually now consume this, much like an activity feed in Facebook or LinkedIn, except it's specifically related to this program of work and enables different sites to be able to get insights from what's happening on other sites. So if you can imagine, at the start of the day, they might have a bit of a safety moment or some sort of pre-planning session, and now it's actually informed by things that are happening all around the program of work. Now, what also can happen when people capture expertise, it might be an insight, but it may not be a lesson. And so what then happens is all of those insights are posted to Teams, to Microsoft Teams communities, and we have communities of practice for different roles and different disciplines that span across all of those different construction sites. So this now starts to decide, is this really a lesson? What can we take away from this? Do we have to change something? And so I guess that then leads to this bit, where the net result of that could be updating documentation. We update a standard, we might update a policy, we might revise a process, we might actually revise our onboarding material so that the issue or opportunity or lesson is not lost. And so this is where you get into the world of codified documents, the stuff that ends up in document libraries. And finally, those documents that are updated are also shared back to this feed and available from the devices so that the mobile workforce can consume them and absorb them really quickly. So the diffusion of this new insight is taken care of. So let's take a look at this, shall we? Okay, so here is the app just in the Power App Studio editor for simplicity. And you can see that the first thing actually is we happen to have an alert. So it is possible for the administrators to send program-wide alerts out for everyone so they can quickly read. What we're going to do is close that for now and just have a look at this feed. So all items in the feed, either insights or document uploads or tweets and stuff like that, come through into an integrated feed, including rich media, and users can then like, and we can then find out which items are popular. So you can see here's an example of some feed items that have been shared, including new documents that have been uploaded. If we actually either clicking share to feed or through the menu, you can share something this way or join a team discussion. But if we share to the feed, we click this screen and it opens up a screen where we can say, okay, hey, I'd like to share, say, a good practice. You can type some content in, you can take a photograph. Let's use a cat. So we have a photograph, and even photographs can be have comments put into them. And you can basically put additional comments in. You can see the weather data or location and weather information. You can tag that against an individual photo. So then you get to pick your audience. Who are we going to share this thing with? And so that's when you say, cool, I'd like to share it with these audiences. So I'm thinking these guys. And so we tag the audience. And then we can go, cool, that's our audience done. Where would this fit into? What part of the work breakdown or the work is it? And you can come in here and you can go, okay, I am thinking that this is related to demolition, cranes, emergency, and excavation. Okay, and then having said that, the final thing really is where we get to say, you know something, I'm also going to post this to the discussion board. So by turning this on, this is what will go to Teams. And you can add hyperlinks as well if you wish to. So I'm not going to share this, but just to show you what this looks like in Teams, we'll quickly switch over. So now you can see here in Teams, here is that very same post that's now been shared from the field as a good practice. So all of that same information that was put in there is actually there available. And someone has liked it as well. So what else can we do here? Well, firstly, we have our ability to go and find an expert. We can click in here and we can basically put some skills in and find people that match those skills. So if we're looking for someone that has some civil works expertise, it will return this. We're also using the WhoBot functionality within Microsoft Teams as well, for those of you that have used that. So more importantly, let's go and have a look at this safety library. Recall that earlier in the discussion, I spoke of how documentation will end up getting updated and modified or enhanced and then shared back to be consumed through the feed. So the safety library also allows users to quickly find and access all of the safety documentation across the program of work. Now, I'll quickly go into preview mode to demonstrate this as it's a little bit easier. So if I click the safety library icon, you are basically looking at a full text search of SharePoint. Now, a user from here, this is just in date order and recency, but they can come in and click filter. I can come in here now and actually get a bit more specific about what I want to see. So a user might see, I want to see all alerts related to confined spaces. And if they apply that filter, it will subsequently load those documents. Similarly, what we might do actually, rather than do something like that, let's go alert and contributed by a certain organization. And we've even got autocomplete. So if I start typing in the letter B, you can see that as I type, it narrows down the selections. And in fact, it automatically, the UI handles it. So if I just click this one here, you can see that the box is dynamically sizing based on what content I put in. So if I go AUS, you can see that now it's this size. And once I choose one, it's now the exact size it needs to be. So I can come up and click an apply filter button here, and it will actually now apply those search settings and come back. And you are now looking at the documents that are classified that way. It shows you that there's been a filter. I could go further, and then maybe if I just put in the word alert, we can also do keyword search with hit highlighting as well. The other thing worth mentioning in this one, these are all looks like PDF results. I wonder if there's a Word document. Here's one. The nice thing is, even if the safety library document is still in Word format, it can still be displayed in Power Apps. Now natively, as I record this video, Power Apps cannot display Word documents, Excel documents, or native Office documents. It only does PDF. But luckily for us, there is actually an API in SharePoint that allows you to retrieve a document, and it will convert it to a PDF on the fly so it can be displayed inside Power Apps. And in fact, I'm going to elaborate on how that was done in a moment. Now this is the point where we really turn our attention to flow, because flow is actually the key enabling piece of infrastructure that allowed us to develop these kind of solutions. So now let's do a bit of a deeper dive and look at how certain pieces of this functionality were delivered. Now the crux of the solution is actually using SharePoint. So this is where we utilize the best out of various tools. We're using SharePoint search engine. So behind the scenes, we have a safety library where all documents and resources get uploaded to. Things like tweets and feed data from third parties like safety agencies and information like that comes into a custom list. All the learnings and insights that have been shared by users are stored here. And we also have a list of popular content, which is tracking the likes and stuff like that. So that is configured as a SharePoint result source, and then we basically say to that result source, they're the locations, but we're only interested in list items, documents, and certain columns and metadata. That all gets processed into the SharePoint search engine. From there, it's accessed through a SharePoint search API, and what happens is when the app loads up, you can see here that we have no feed right now. It basically talks to the SharePoint REST API and says, give me the last 50 results. And then back comes that data and it is viewable inside the app. Given that, let's just think about how something gets shared so it appears in that feed. Basically, as per the demo, you remember how a user can come in, tag an observation or a good practice, take a photo, tag an audience, and then choose which community practice it should go to if they wish to share. The way that is done is we are using something called action cards, and action cards enable you to put a much more structured piece of content into tools like Outlook and Teams. In Teams, this is done by an incoming webhook. So we're using Flow to grab the contribution from the user and then send it to an incoming webhook, and then it appears in Teams in the way you can see here, either on the mobile or in the browser. Now, if you've never seen an action card before, you may well have. This is just a sample one from Microsoft. Outlook uses them. And if you've ever seen one of these kind of flow approvals where it says, hey, you've got approval required, and inside the context of the application, here in this case being Outlook, you then basically click approve and it says, cool, you have been approved. Unlike the old days of when you would send a task approval in SharePoint and it would be a link that takes you out of Outlook into SharePoint, now everything is done in the context of the application. So that is the essence of message cards. There is a schema published that actually shows you how to create this format. And so my Flow had to build this action card. This is actually what it really looks like behind the scenes, all of this ugly looking JSON. And in fact, this kind of shows you how certain sections map to certain parts of the action card. Fortunately for all of us, there is a website called Message Card Playground that helps you do all the work. So just to quickly take you there, here is the Playground site, and you can do things like there's your schema on the left, here's the actual card on the right, and you can choose different types of cards. So in fact, if you want to know how Microsoft Flow approvals work, you are literally looking at the schema. And here's the flow itself. Just zooming out a bit to give you a bit of context. That's better. You can see that this flow is actually triggered by Power Apps, and Power Apps sends the ID of the new insight or the new piece of content that a user has shared. And the first thing we need to do is use a SharePoint get item action that actually goes and grabs the full detail of that particular share so that we can then build the JSON that we need. And we are also using Flow's capability for running parallel tasks. You can see that there are 4 sets of discrete tasks here that are actually running the different parts of building out the action card. The reason I do that is mainly for performance, because all the different sections of the card can all be built at the same time. So why not take advantage of the parallelism ability of Flow to build things out quicker? So this branch here, in fact, what this one does, I'm pretty sure, this is the audience one. Basically, the audience is a term set. It's a managed metadata column, multi-value managed metadata column. So this is a pretty simple piece. All it does is it iterates through every single audience that has been tagged, and we are using an action, a variable action called append string. And what this is basically doing is for each audience, it's building out a comma delimited list of audiences into a string. So the audience coming from SharePoint is actually in an array format by virtue of the fact it's a multi-value field. Same happens with the work activity. This is another SharePoint column and it works in exactly the same way as the previous one. I'm using the append string. So the outcome of these two branches is 2 strings, okay? Now we come across, this is the one that actually handles image thumbnails, and this one's a tricky one to explain because there's some other flow things that I haven't yet covered. But basically the idea is we have a variable for storing image thumbnails, and these are going to be in a URL format. It's a SharePoint API that returns a thumbnail URL. And we also need another variable. And this is one where we use the conditional aspects of flow because we only need to deal with photos if photos have actually been included in the original share from someone. So there's a conditional piece of logic here that basically says, hey, if photos have been included, do a whole bunch of work and build out the action card JSON to create the photo. And the final one is related to hyperlinks. And so again, if you haven't done a hyperlink, then you can keep going. But if you have done a hyperlink, there's a bit of extra work to do. The net result of all of this is a single action card variable, which has all of this stuff combined. In fact, if I open this, you can see that it's basically JSON with various chunks of logic that comes from those parallel tasks above. And that finally uses the HTTP action and it posts it to the Microsoft Teams webhook. And there is the body. The body is the action card that came from that variable. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what that flow does. And this diagram kind of recaps what we've just been through to show you how each of the sections of the flow and the branches, the parallel branches, relate to certain sections of the action card. Okay, so another interesting thing that flow really helps with is, in actual fact, the information that is returned by the SharePoint search engine does not include photos. It's just the raw search result data of the tweets, the shares, the documents. So we need to do something about that, and Flow just proves its magic here. It's also worth noting that the same issue happens with the action cards. So I've represented that with, I guess, placeholders on both of them. So the way this flow works is, firstly, I need the ID of the image. Now, fortunately, I've configured SharePoint Search Engine to return that into the feed. Power Apps calls Flow, gives it this item ID. It uses this item ID and goes and finds that image in the media library. Now, we don't want to return the image itself because what if it's a high-res photo, like an 8 megabyte photo? This feed would take ages to load. So what we do is we call a SharePoint API and we basically say, hey SharePoint, here is an item ID. Can you please give me a thumbnail of this particular size? And SharePoint will return a thumbnail, a URL for you of that thumbnail, a pre-authenticated URL that you then use in Power Apps to actually display the photo. And so it's done really fast. So here's what that one looks like. Okay, so here's the thumbnail handling flow. And I should call out straight away that I'm using a HTTP request and response pattern here. This is a relic of history because you can now do what I'm describing using the standard Power Apps trigger. At the time I did this, you could not return data to Power Apps. You could only send it one way from Power Apps to Flow and not the other way. But nevertheless, Power Apps basically calls this flow by sending a post, a HTTP post to this URL, and it passes in the ID, the list item ID of the share. So basically if someone shared something, it's the ID of that person's observation or good practice. I then have a variable that extracts that from the query string, so from the HTTP trigger, and that's basically saying, hey, go to the trigger, go to the output section, go to the query section, which is the query string, and look for item ID. I then take this and I go to the media library where all the photos are stored, and I use a SharePoint get files action, and I say, okay, please go to the media library, and I only want to see photos that relate to this particular share, which is this piece here, a little piece of OData. And note, I only bring one back. So even if you took 50 photos with that particular share, I'm only going to bring back the first one because I only show one photo in the high-level activity feed. Now, the interesting thing about this is, even though I'm only asking for one photo, the data still comes back as an array because note the action is called the get files action. If there were 10 files, it would bring back an array. That means that when we start making use of this down here, there is an apply to each, and all I need out of this data is the list item ID of that photo. But because it comes back as an array, I have this apply to each. That necessitates another little trick. You can't initialize variables inside a loop. You have to initialize a variable outside. So I make the variable called media ID and I make it empty. Okay, so it's completely empty here. And then in here, I actually set it. So even though there's an apply to each, it's only ever going to run once. It's just a quirk of how this is done. You can get around this with expressions and telling it to only return the first record, but that takes us too far afield from here. So by this point, we now have everything we need to know about this particular photo, and we use the send a HTTP request action to basically talk to a SharePoint API, one of my favorite APIs called the Render List Data as Stream API. And we basically pass in that media identifier and a few extra parameters, and among other things, we are going to get back a whole bunch of information which we can construct a URL from. So basically what you're seeing here is me building a URL by using all of the information that comes back from this HTTP request. I then, having built the URL, I save it and send it back to Power Apps. Now, this might seem really conceptual and really kind of freaky, but rest assured it's cool. I have already recorded about a 50-minute video in the flow of the week from November 14, where I go in depth into this particular flow. So I'm not intending to cover this into detail here. Just rest assured that basically at one end, the way this flow works is at the top end, you pass it an ID of the share, and by the back end, it basically says, and here's the first thumbnail for any photos associated with that share. Okay, so here's another flow that I use. This one's a pretty simple one. The feed incorporates information from other sources. It's not just shares from the field. It can incorporate another agency or a safety-oriented organization that maybe has a Twitter handle or an RSS feed or a REST API. But basically the pattern is this. Let's use Twitter as the example. We monitor certain Twitter handles and hashtags. We then save that to SharePoint. And typically, because it's a feed and I don't need too many of them, the flow will also get rid of older ones so that we don't overload the feed. And this basic pattern works for all of them. And then the user, the administrator of this solution, in all of these lists, there is a column that allows them to decide whether it goes to the feed. So information from other third-party sources are actually vetted before they go to, they're consumed by everyone. And so this is just incorporated into the search engine and REST API that I described earlier. So I am running out of time now, so let's just switch tack and talk about a few strategic considerations from implementing a project like this at scale. First one, I would suggest you need to treat this whole thing like a startup. What I mean with a startup is startups usually have, very few resources, and if they make errors of assumption, they're finished because they don't have a lot of capital to begin with. So they have to be very careful about their assumptions. So too with Power Apps, Flow, and the Power Tools. You want to make sure what is the most fundamental assumption we are testing here, and if it's saving time or improving some sort of process efficiency, then ask yourself, what's the minimum I can do to prove that? That way, you're always focusing on value and you're not getting too caught up in making it look pretty or adding features that don't necessarily contribute to that core value proposition. And that's actually what the term minimum viable product really means. It does not mean beta. It does not mean a rough cut version. It means, have you proven what you set out to prove? And if you can do that with a very basic app with a few buttons and not too much branding, that is the way to go. The other one is related to this: treat users as co-creators. Because they are the ones most impacted by the issue, you need to walk in their shoes. So rather than assume that you know what users want, it's the age-old thing. Go out and actually walk in their shoes. I do a lot of apps in the safety space, in industrial scenarios, and most people are wearing safety gear and gloves. And so certain color combinations don't work. If you're wearing gloves on a small phone, don't even think about using option buttons. It has to be big and blocky. That's not immediately obvious to designers unless they walk in the shoes of the users and see the overall environment that the user's working in. This one is important to me. I think it's really important to share patterns and good practices to the community. These tools are citizen developer tools. Don't forget that. They are actually designed for not necessarily IT or not necessarily super technical users. So if you come up with patterns and approaches that work really well, share them so that others can benefit and we can further foster the innovation and use of these tools. One last thing for you, maybe a bit of a meta theme if you like. This is advice to IT departments in general, and if you're a CIO watching this one is for you. You need to learn to tolerate rapid change. Now, back in the day, organizations used to complain to Microsoft it was such a big effort to implement a SharePoint upgrade, say 2010 to 2013, that global enterprises were just skipping upgrades because of the cost and complexity. Well, that problem has been solved. The industry asked Microsoft to solve it, and now we have the other side of it where you have rapid change. I know for a fact that the Power Apps and the Flow team have 3 to 4 week release cycles, so that there are new features coming out very rapidly. This has implications for how you train, for example. This has implications on all sorts of things. If you think you can basically wait for complete certainty, it's just not going to happen. And I only talked Power Apps and Flow here. What about Power BI, Azure Functions, the SharePoint ecosystem? So with that, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this session. I will be on Twitter for any questions and looking forward to your feedback. And thanks very much, folks. Have a good one.
All right, everybody. And that is all she wrote. That's our show for today. Thank you so very much for joining us. We will be following up with you. Those of you who registered officially and didn't get this link shared with you randomly, you will receive an email. In that email, you'll have links to all these sessions that you watched or possibly missed today. We will include the slides of as many of those as we can. And we will also include some information about how you can take today's information and use it to your benefit and continue your flow journey. Because this is just step one, guys, right? I want you all to work less and do more. And today was your introduction to doing just that. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us. Thank you to all of you for coming and watching. I really appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you all again. Look forward to hearing from us, because you will be. All right, everybody, much love. Thanks from the Flow team. Thanks from the speakers. We will see you next time.